Running out of closet space? Don't stop shopping. Start selling with The Real Real. Whether it's the jewelry your ex bought you before they became your ex, or that quiet luxury bag you bought before remembering you're actually a maximalist, give it a second chance with someone else. Sell it with The Real Real and make room in your closet for something else that feels more like you. The best part of selling with The Real Real? They handle everything from photography and copywriting to pricing and shipping, because your to-do list is already long enough. With a community of over 40 million members ready to shop what's in your closet, your items sell fast, so you can leave the past in the past. Because resale on The Real Real is for second chances. Plus, October is National Consignment Month, so new consigners earn $100 extra for a limited time. Go to therealreal.com to start selling and get $100 extra to keep shopping. That's therealreal.com for your extra $100. Therealreal.com. Terms apply.
Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipson. Today's guest is Victoire Cogevina, the VP of Women's Football at OneFootball. She is part Greek, part Argentinian, with a French name, and she was kind enough to let me call her Vicky, since my French pronunciation is far from impressive. Vicky is based in London, and she is acknowledged as one of the Latin American women that are refining the football industry globally. She co-founded SR All Stars, recognized by FIFA as the first female-owned sports agency in the world. She then founded Gloria, a Silicon Valley-backed consumer app for football fans that was later acquired by OneFootball in 2022, where she is now working as the VP of Women's Football. She has lived in 11 cities, speaks 4 languages, and she embodies the saying that nothing is impossible. Get ready to learn why she didn't give up, even after hearing no 137 times, how it was like working as a football agent with her mother, how to handle pregnancy in women's sport, why she founded Gloria, how she became the first female to sell a startup in football, and much, much more. This is really a can't miss episode, so pay attention for the next hour or so. And if you prefer video, you can watch this episode on YouTube. The link is in the show notes. And as always, we are sponsored by InSport Education, the online business school for sport. For 2023, they have created some amazing new courses and modules. How about the marketing of women's sport, data in sport, governance and geopolitics, and many more. As always, you get 10% off all courses, programs, and modules with the code Sports Management Podcast 10. The first module starts already in February, so sign up now before it's too late. The link is in the show notes. Vicky Cogevina, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
I am very excited to talk to you, and you have worked for some time in the football industry, and you founded Gloria Football, which was acquired by OneFootball, where you are now the vice president of women's football. So can you tell us a little bit about this role and your journey?
The word football comes up quite a lot, right, in that introduction. So I guess it's good to start to how I ended up here in this place. And it all started in Argentina. I'm a half Greek, half Argentinian. And I was very lucky to have an older brother that would take me to the stadium with him when I was very young. We're both fans of Racing Club, which is the third biggest club in Argentina. And it's also known to have one of the best fan bases in the world. So I basically learned football and learned what it means to be a football fan by going to that stadium every Sunday and fell in love with the sport. However, I was a woman in Argentina in the 90s, and it was not very common for us to play football back then. So nobody really thought to put a ball in my feet. So I just became a very, very strong fan, essentially. And when I was about 19 years old, I was working in fashion. and a very dramatic turn of events, because I thought I was going to be in fashion the rest of my life, my mother invited me to work with her in football. So she was already an agent representing Latin American players in the MLS. And she really wanted to expand essentially the agency and needed some help on the marketing side. So I joined her on what was a wild, wild ride. As you can imagine, 2 women, mother and daughter, representing players was not common. It's still not common, unfortunately, but learned a lot about the industry and what it really takes to have the product on the field, right? Because as fans, the only thing that you see is, 11 players playing, but it takes a lot more than that. So I fell in love with it. I knew immediately that I was going to spend the rest of my life dedicated to sport. And with the years, I started realizing that there was a lot more problems on the fan side than on the player side. So I decided to leave the agency and start Gloria Football, which is the company you just mentioned. I moved to San Francisco because this was a tech company, a consumer product for football fans, essentially, to build online community. And I thought that, the better investors in tech and the better, talent would be in San Francisco. So I moved there without knowing absolutely anyone and started pitching a football company to American investors. So that was on its own a very challenging experience, but I was very lucky after 147 no's to get an incredible investor, Argentinian, who was a founder of Reddit, but is also more famously married to Serena Williams, and essentially started this company over there. Now, a few years later, we were acquired by our main competitor, OneFootball. Because I think that we had done such a great work on the women's football side, they had realized that we were the right fit to essentially expand and double down on the commitment of women's football. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm 3 months into the role, so it's very, very new. But yeah, that's a very long answer to your simple question, but hopefully I answered it well.
Very well, I would say. And it was not a simple question. It's backtracking their whole career is a big thing. And so many questions from my side is very interesting. One thing is you said that there are more issues on the fan side than the player side. So what were some of the fan engagement issues or fan issues that you saw?
I think that there was 2 that I particularly focused on. There's many, right? There's always room for improvement, especially in a sport that touches billions of people like football. But the ones that I was focused on was the community building aspect. So in my own personal experience, football was my way of building community and making friends around the world. I lived in 11 different cities and I speak 4 languages, and all of that came not because I chose it, but because of my father and my father's work. And I always used football to make new friends. And as we continued to, develop this industry, the internet came in with full force and allowed people to connect around different subjects. And football being one of those subjects that really touches everyone in the world, it didn't really have a hub online. There wasn't a home for it. There wasn't a place for it where you could go as a fan and really interact with other fans, share news, and share the banter and all the beautiful things that come with watching a football match. So that was really the initial kind of vision for Gloria. Funnily enough, OneFootball had already been doing that for 10 years by the time I started, but very far away from me in another continent. But that was really the first thing that we did. And then the second thing was the inclusion of women. I was ushered into football by my brother, and that is very common when you speak to women of my age, that a father or a brother or a boyfriend or an uncle or a cousin, basically a male figure, ushered them into football and allowed them to come into football. And I realized that the newer generations, because they had this access to social media and the internet that we didn't have, were kind of choosing to get into it by their own merit. And that was a very, very powerful consumer behavior that didn't exist before, but now someone needed to do something about. And therefore, the focus on building a brand and a community that would be inclusive to women and changing that perception that football is not really for women, or it's not something that they necessarily belong to, was very much at the center of the vision and the mission. And it is still today at OneFootball.
Yeah, so they saw the potential from Gloria and acquired, and now you're the vice. So you are leading the women's football for OneFootball. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. Yes. OneFootball is a company that has been around for almost 15 years now. They were one of the first 100 apps on the App Store. So it's really a company that has been around for a while, and they've done an incredible job in supporting the men's football ecosystem in the past, more than a decade now. The growth of women's football has come very rapidly and really surprised a lot of people, I believe. So now they're coming in, or we're coming back in and doubling down on this new product, on this new audience, and really supporting its growth. And I believe that we have the very best platform to do so, not only because of the sheer amount of users that already exist on OneFootball. There's about 120 million monthly active users, 120 million monthly fans of football, where that we can reach, but also the infrastructure and their resources and incredible talent to kind of lead the way in terms of the growth of the women's game.
So that's the main goal, to help grow the women's football.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a business. It's a business opportunity. This is the other half of the world we're talking about. It's not small. And as I always say, the last 100 years, football has been built, sold, marketed to men, and it's been very successful. And now it's time for the women, right? We need to build a product and to think about them and market it to them in a way that might end up being very different from what we did for men, to create a whole new business category that has an underlying gender equality movement that is very, very powerful. Because obviously a sport like football that has been male dominated for so many decades now has women playing on the field, has female executives making, pivotal decisions for all these institutions, whether it's a club, a federation, a tournament. All of those things are very much inspiring for your normal, average, female consumer. And we gotta use all of this as a vehicle for gender equality, but again, as well as an incredible business opportunity, one that I don't think you see many times in a generation.
Definitely. And I think women's sports in general is a great business opportunity. But as you said, like football is such a strong sport. It played on all continents. Now also with the United States taking a bigger interest in what they call soccer. How do you see the growth potential if we look in different markets? Because you have insight from South America, for example, where football is huge today for men. How is the women's game there, for example? How do you see the growth in US, Europe, and so forth?
So I think that's what makes the whole story of women's football so interesting. It's because it's become a global movement. It's not really only in one place. And I believe it started for the normal audience, because obviously before that, there was a lot of people working really, really hard to bring women's football to where it was. But that 30th of March in the Camp Nou Stadium with Barcelona played Real Madrid in the quarterfinals of the Champions League, and 91,000 fans showed up to cheer for the Barcelona team. That day, things changed because we suddenly all realized, I think, and I was at that game, and it was one of the best days of my life, that there was space and interest for women to play the sport and for a whole new audience to follow it. And this audience was obviously more women, but as well families, younger children, men and women, that would now come into stadiums and enjoy this beautiful sport in a much safer and healthier way. But that really ignited a revolution that continued on until the end of that tournament, the Women's Champions League, with a final in Torino, in Italy, of all places, in the Juventus Stadium, that also forced the Italian Federation to professionalize women's football. So kind of, a domino effect. that then, culminated in the summer with the Euros in the UK. That was an immense, success, obviously, with not only the attendance, but the viewership, and with this cherry on top of the cake where England brought it back home finally after over 60 years, in a country as well where women's football had been banned for almost 50 years prior to that. So the domino effect started in Europe, but then had massive effect in Africa, for example. So basically the Euro version of the African Cup, there was another attendance record broken over there. It continued in the United States with the local league. So with the NWSL, where a team like Angel City, that was an expansion team that was playing its very first game ever, not only had sold almost $50 million worth of sponsorship, but had also filled the LAFC stadium, which is a MLS men's team, and continued all the way to South America, where in Brazil and Argentina, two very, very powerful footballing nations, but that had historically been very much male-dominated. Now you've seen, La Bombonera filled with fans watching women play in such a historic stadium. And in São Paulo, 3 weekends in a row where they broke their own attendance record after the other, reaching up to almost 44,000 fans in a stadium to watch women play. So the reality is that every market has its own momentum, but there is a global momentum that I think is helping local efforts, right? The UK right now is definitely leading the effort, which is I guess I'll use the dramatic effect or dramatic turn of events, because the US had been such a powerful nation in that regard. But right now, the growth of the WSL over here and the quality of the games, and obviously England being the footballing nation it always has been, it's leading the effort. But I think it's also raising the bar for everyone around them, and culminating in the Women's World Cup, which is not minor, coming up in a few months from now. First time in history that a men's and a women's World Cup are so close to each other. And if you allow me to say so, the Men's World Cup was incredibly entertaining this past edition, and obviously Argentina winning and bringing it home, which is probably one of the best moments of my life as well. So I think all of that is kind of helping for the growth of the women's game to be truly global and not just local.
Yes, definitely. I agree with you. And congratulations to the win for Argentina. I know that that meant a lot to you. I saw that on your social media, that you were very, very happy about it.
Yes. Not only was I happy, but I was also pregnant. So I am pregnant, still pregnant. But I managed to be able to be at the stadium and watch the games, and it meant a lot to me. I'm expecting a baby girl, and I was there and with her, and I kept telling her, you're seeing Messi win the World Cup, and it meant so much to me. And I was also there with my brother who introduced me to the sport. So.
That's very nice, and congratulations also to your future daughter. And that's also an interesting topic with pregnancy in women's sports. But let's put a pin in that for now. And if we're talking about the women's sport, you said it's a great momentum right now with women's football. The World Cup is coming up. The reality still is that the gender gap, considering the pay gap, media coverage, access to facilities and so forth, is still large. How do you see the gender gap, equality gap, shrinking, and how are we going to get there?
It's a very valid point. And we are, if you try and compare us to the men's, very, very backwards and at a disadvantage. But I also believe that this startup mentality and mindset we're at, right? Because it's a nascent business, it's a new one. There's not many rules, is also what's giving us all the advantage to be able to break molds and to break rules that have been installed for decades, and try new things, right? Understanding that this is a new product and a new audience. So I believe that that's gonna continue to fuel the momentum, right? There's going to be more and more companies making, decisions that are going to push the game forward. that are going to make it more accessible to fans. We've already seen in the NWSL when CBS decided to air the final of the NWSL on prime time, and how that dramatically changed the viewership. So decisions like that are going to continue to take place, which will then essentially trickle down into the entire infrastructure, right? So clubs will receive more money, and players will be paid better, and facilities will be better. There'll be more money invested in health issues. That's something that we're seeing a lot in women's game, where there's a ton of injuries because the players are not properly trained, and there's not enough data on how to take care of them so they don't get injured. There's obviously all of the women's reproduction system, which is something that the men's never had to think about, that we need to also invest into it. But I'm very positive that we're in the right direction, and that the speed that we're growing at is very unexpected and something that you rarely see in any other industry. So we're in a good track. And finally, I'll also add that brands have and will continue to play a gigantic role in this growth, because women's football is, as I said, and I will continue to say, a gender equality movement. To me, and I know I speak for a lot of women, a very, very empowering thing to see. And if we think about the previous gender equality movement that was truly global, we're talking about Me Too. And Me Too was obviously a very negative, very sad movement at the end of the day, because it was talking about all these awful things that happened to women. But in the case of women's football, it's the opposite. It's a very positive movement. It talks about empowering women on and outside of the pitch. And that essentially allows brands to really make themselves a partner in crime of that movement and really help it forward. And I think it's something that there's no amount of money that you can pay to get. So we have a lot of brands that have been in the football industry for many years now, looking at the women's football space as a great opportunity to talk to their female consumers. But then there's a second wave of brands that have never really looked at the football space as a place to promote what they do, and to get to consumers that are saying, hey, maybe if I come in here and support it, whether you are a big pharma or you are a fashion brand or a beauty brand, I might get new consumers that care. And we know that Gen Z cares a lot about social issues like gender equality. So it's not minor, and I always, every time I get to speak to any brand executive, and I'm like, you guys have a lot of power and you should be using it in the right way.
Definitely. And there are many brands and companies that have pulled some of their investment money from men's sport and invested more in women's sport. And it has not been for charity reason to say that it's a CSR project. It's a business investment that these companies have made. And that's great to see that the companies are realizing that there are great opportunities in women's football and women's sports generally.
Yeah, no, to me, as a business person myself, when women's football or gender equality is seen as a social, corporate social responsibility action or project, or it always breaks my heart a little bit. But then I also think it's better than they look at it this way than they don't do it at all. But smart executives realize very quickly that it's a business opportunity. And I think at this point, we don't have to kind of justify it anymore. It is a new audience, an audience that spends more money, that takes more decisions in the household, and an audience that in numbers is just bigger, right? Because if you're thinking about a family going to a stadium, it's one person versus four. So how much money can you generate from those consumers? And so, yeah, it's definitely a very, very big business opportunity.
Yeah. And you spoke about the female reproductive system, and that this, of course, is different from males, and how to handle that, especially for female athletes. Since it's in your case now that you mentioned that you're pregnant as well, it's a topic that is current here. So how do you see this topic for women's athletes, and how can that be best handled?
Look, I think it comes down to performance, right? If you understand the female body better, you will be able to help them perform better. And as this team continue to invest money into buying great players and building strong teams that can then go on and, win a Champions League or win a local championship, they're going to naturally be interested in understanding how to increase this performance. And the reality is that in parallel, this whole gender equality movement is making not only the football industry realize, but the wellness and health industry realize that there's very little data on women and on their health and how it works. Until 2 or 3 years ago, they had never done a clinical study on the clitoris, for example, which is crazy. It's crazy. It's like, it's just something that if you think about it, how come, nobody invested into understanding the other half of the world's body? Also because, again, it's a big business opportunity. If you can provide them with better products and better medication and, better tracking devices, whatever it is, then you already are creating a new business model and a business unit. And I think that it's kind of feeding into itself, right? There's this kind of growing need and interest of understanding the female body. And then when you put it onto the football space and seeing how when you don't take care of it, it actually becomes a really negative thing, not only because it's sad to see players injured, but also because these clubs have paid money for these players to be there and now they cannot play. So I think that the clubs are already realizing that they have to take time and invest in this. There's teams like the U.S. women's national team that has been doing it for many, many years. So, there's people that are very knowledgeable about it and on how to implement it. There's new technologies coming out where you can sync the period of players in a team, which is very helpful in terms of performance and being able to predict how players are going to react in a specific game. So there's a lot of information, and there's a considerable amount of people and companies working towards that, again, with the motivation of building a better business, whether it's a club or whether it's a brand.
Yeah, for sure. The physiology aspect is super important. But also if we talk about it from like an employment perspective, you need to give these women the security because they will be out for at least a year, right? They are pregnant for 9 months and then whatever the recovery period is. And then you have the psychological effect as well. You have, in some cases, postpartum depression or other things that might occur. So just, to see the whole picture and give the security to these, let's say, women's football players in this case, that they have this type of support, that they can get the psychologist if needed. They have a physician. They still have their employment. Their contract will not be cut just because they get pregnant. I mean, all of this, it's a big question.
No, absolutely. And I think that for athletes, not only in football, but, in tennis and every other sport, the question of will I perform as well as I did before I was pregnant is always something that is there and in the back of your mind. And so you see women kind of delaying that process to much later on. But I think that with the right support and the right information, the female body is incredible. And I'm experiencing it myself, like growing a human being and developing organs. And I always joke with my partner. I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, I don't know. I'm on my phone. I'm like, well, I'm building a brain. So it's pretty amazing what we're doing and how, that body naturally needs to go back to its original shape and form. And there's a lot that we can do to help that. And I think that the clubs specifically and coaches and the coaching staff is responsible to be able to create that safe space, as you said. I mean, until 2 years ago, being a professional female footballer was not really a career because you were making not enough money to justify having only that job. So all these players had 2 or 3 other jobs on the side. So now, we're kind of moving really quickly into, okay, well, now it's a job and now it's well paid or, better paid than before. How can we also think about all these other things, right? Because it's not only about being pregnant. Think about a player, for example, that, plays in Latin America and a club wants to buy her and bring her to Europe. That player maybe has a family and has kids, and it's a much different decision for a woman to move her whole family and to be okay with that than a man, right? Like men have their wives and wives take care of the children, and they're totally okay with, moving around because it's part of their careers. Now, for women, like if they have two kids, for example, and they have to move to Spain, they have to consider, like, am I getting paid enough to be able to, sustain my whole family? Like, am I the breadwinner? And if not, can whether it's my husband or my wife support me in that aspect? So there's a lot more to think about, but I think that it's starting to become more and more normal. And as time goes by, it's going to become better as well.
Yeah, I think so too. And I really believe that's the case. If we talk a little bit about you and your career, we mentioned before that you founded Gloria Football. You have a passion for sports tech in general. And you said that your family was a big reason for why you got into football, with your brother and your mom being an agent.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you start out in sport in general? And sports tech, did you study in the STEM studies, and then that up until, how you founded Gloria?
No, my answer is no. I didn't study anything related to it. I actually studied fashion. And I never thought I would end up working in football, but because it wasn't really an option, right? I don't think that when you're a woman and you're 16, you're like, I want to work in football. Like now it's becoming more and more normal. But when I was 16, it wasn't definitely the case. But I was very, very lucky to have an incredible mother who had defied the rules of society multiple times before I was even born, becoming one of the first commercial pilots in Latin America, a female commercial pilot in Latin America. And then, becoming a football agent, which was also very rare. At that point, we actually became the first ones that weren't related to a player. There was a few female agents around, but they were either the mother or the aunt or, the wife of the player. So I was lucky to have a role model in my life that never allowed me to use my gender as an excuse to do or not do something, right? And I don't think a lot of girls have that, the luck, essentially. So I spend a very, very good amount of my time fighting for that. So I'm on the board of Women in Sports Tech, which was an incredible NGO based in the United States that do exactly what you just said. They make sure that in high schools, girls are taking more STEM classes, and they provide, internships and mentorships and fellowships in big sports tech companies, so women can kind of set their foot into the industry without too much friction. They also give an incredible platform to women like myself to tell their story that makes it, more and more accessible to a little girl to say, I see someone that looks like me and therefore I can do it as well. But in my particular case, it was my mother, and then I kind of built my own table and brought my chair, because there wasn't anywhere where I could sit. So I decided to create my job. Then I became CEO of a sports tech startup. And then after that, I won football as well. Like I created my job as VP of women's football, and incredibly proud of all of that. But I'm also hoping that it doesn't take starting a whole company or a couple of companies to then get a job like the one that I have today.
Yeah. But why sports tech in general? Or was it an idea that you came up with that you thought would solve a problem? Or is it in general that sports tech is something that interests you?
So I think there's a couple of things. On the one side, my last job before I moved into football was at a tech startup. It was a fashion tech startup, Net-a-Porter, that still exists. And it had a female founder, which, 12 years ago, it was very rare. And working at that company, I realized how powerful tech is, right? Building software and how many millions of people it could touch and how it could really change the whole way our industry works, right? So Net-a-Porter basically did the impossible by selling luxury items online, something that, 20 years ago, no one would have ever believed it could be possible. So I left Net-a-Porter kind of with this idea that technology and building software was an incredibly scalable way of changing the world. And when I moved into football, I was always naturally interested in understanding how this industry, football, had moved and evolved with the introduction of the internet and the introduction of social media channels, et cetera, et cetera. And it always kind of blew my mind that football was very, very slow to adapt, something that was good for business, that would make business faster, more efficient, cheaper. But they really didn't embrace it at all. I mean, I remember working as an agent and speaking with clubs about the importance of having an Instagram account. And people would tell me that they really didn't see any value in it. And now literally they run the whole business on Instagram. So it's kind of that curiosity that why is there nothing here? Because we could resolve and solve many problems with software. And why is no one really using it? And actually, when I arrived to Silicon Valley, I went to some of the best and biggest VC funds over there. And most of the pitch wasn't explaining them what my company does, but explaining them what football is and how big it is and how the audience of football is bigger than any of the industries that we're backing at the moment. And I think that doing that, I had no idea that I was the first going in. I mean, I would go into these meetings, you're the first soccer company that we hear. And I wasn't a guy that had graduated from Harvard or Stanford. I was this Latin girls with tattoos that, spoke with an accent. And it was kind of a very shocking image to them. But at the end of the day, it became very common right now. Investment in soccer startups is a thing in the US, and it's kind of becoming very obvious to the industry as well that sports tech, right? Like building software is a much more powerful way of resolving problems than trying to do it manually.
Yeah. And much like the female football players are role models for up-and-coming girls who wants to pursue a career as a professional footballer, before they had to look up to male players, they might not have had female role models. And the same way yourself can be a role model for someone who wants to go into the business side and show that you could do it. And I know that in addition to your role, you're also a member of the board of directors for WIST, Women in Sports Tech. And I've actually spoken to Mary Lou McFarland previously on this podcast.
Is the best.
Yes. So what are you doing with WIST?
It's really giving an opportunity to girls and women and minorities, not only women, the chance of getting into sports at a very early age, and doing it through a number of different strategies. But I'm very aware that I was very lucky in my own personal experience, having a mother that really pushed me into these things. But I really, truly don't believe that everyone is in that position. So it was a no-brainer when Marilu approached me to be on the board. I also get to work with some amazing talent, like we're talking real OGs of the industry, and Marilu herself. I mean, she was one of the very first women to be in that space, and it kind of became this strong community where like we all understood in our own right how hard it was, and we wanted to make it easier for the next generation. And I'm not going to take any credit because this is all WIST credit. They've done an amazing job at finding girls and people of color and that really had a massive passion for sports but had absolutely no idea how to get into it, and guiding them through that process, and then helping them transform themselves into sports tech execs, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. And to get more women in sports tech in general, show that it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
You're also an ambassador for gender equality in the United Nations.
Yes. I have a lot of titles.
A lot on your plate. So what does that role include?
That is a opportunity that came to me a few years ago, where we've had a lot of conversations with the UN Women around how powerful can football be as a vehicle to deliver gender equality. Gender equality is one of the UN's 2030 goals, and they have a very, very ambitious goal there. And my whole message to them was always, why don't we leverage the power and the globality that football has to deliver this message and to get more people onto it? And we built this beautiful partnership together. And I've been, a fierce ambassador for them and all the work that they've done. I've been the godmother of some of their programs, especially in Latin America, and worked with them to essentially push this forward. We've also worked with the UN to help women in football, whether they're on or off the pitch, in situations of inequality or, unfair situations, where the UN gets involved and fights for them as well and represents them and really empowers them to fight against an organization that might want to silence them. So that has been probably one of the saddest parts of the job, because sometimes there's situations where like, how is this happening in this century? But also seeing how they're overcome, by the sheer presence of the UN and what it means to be kind of in the bad side of the UN. You don't want that. So it's been amazing so far. And I'm really hoping that I'll continue to work with them for many years to come, because again, they build, an organization and a brand that has truly changed the world. And if we can combine the power of football and UN, then we're going to get to wherever we want much faster. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It's a fantastic initiative. Looking back on your career, you said that your parents told you that, there's nothing you cannot do. You went into football, you created your own company, you sold it, you are doing, you have an executive position, you're helping out. It seems like, so much positivity. You seem like a very positive person in general, that nothing is cannot be overcome. But has there been any bumps on the road in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them? So
many bumps. Look, I think that, and they still happen. It's part of life, right? Life is not linear. I'm very positive, because in my world, it's the only way to operate, right? If I had to look at the stats, when I was fundraising, for example, only 0.2% of female founders got funding at that time. 0.2%. So statistically, It was impossible for me to go raise money. But I was positive that I could do it. And I was very naive about it, because it wasn't easy. I had 147 no's before I had my first yes. And, maybe it doesn't sound like a massive number, but when you're getting no's 3-4 times a day for weeks on end, it can be very discouraging at times. And I remember even with Alexis, I reached out to Alexis's team 7 different times. And in the 8th time, we finally convinced them that they had to see us. And I think that was very empowering for me, because I learned that I had to believe in myself no matter what. And I think it's very cliche, but there's also a reason why a lot of people that have kind of made it, quote unquote, because I'm only at the very beginning of everything I want to do, but the people that have achieved big things, they always say, believe in yourself. Don't let anyone tell you you can't do it. Because that's, to me, one of the biggest bumps that I faced, that I would go into meetings and they would tell me straight up, you'll never raise money. This is not a good idea. Or, why do you think you can do it? And whatever that. And it would be very discouraging. And I've had this situation happen to me, not only with investors, but people inside my own team, people in my own family as well. My mother was very empowering, but my father wasn't. So, I think that when you have this constantly being a part of your life, because when you're trying to do something new and you're trying to break a mold, or you're trying to do something that is just different, there's always going to be people. And the ones that are closest to you hurt the most, that are going to tell you, you can't do it. I remember I had a boyfriend that when I was trying to raise money from Alexis was, why are you even trying? That was his message to me. He's like, he's one of the best investors in the world. Why do you think that he's going to invest in a first-time founder that has no tech experience in a sport that nobody cares about here in the US? What makes you think that that's going to happen? And when I did get the money from Alexis, I was like, you know what? I should have never even wasted any time listening to other people and really focus on what I knew was possible. So I think that is still until today. But now it's very hard to convince me that I can't do something. But when I was younger, and I wish I could have told that to myself, was just don't spend time listening to people saying that you can't do something. I mean, there's always very valuable feedback and lessons there. So it's not like every person that ever spoke to me had nothing interesting to say to me. On the contrary, I actually learned a lot. But in the space of telling you how the future was going to play out for me, that was when I should have never believed anyone or never even entertained that, because nobody knows how the future will develop. That's a reality. You can be the best business person in the world and you still don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And therefore, that means that it's a whole world of opportunities and possibilities. And I keep that mindset very close to my heart. And I think it's really what keeps me driving and not going totally crazy.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And what you said that with your father, I heard a quote from a guy named David Meltzer in the United States. He's also working partly, I think, in the sports industry. He said that just because someone loves you doesn't mean that they give you good advice. And he gave a story from his mother that he wanted to invest in selling legal research online. And she said that, the internet, that's not the future. So, I mean, you heard that. And of course, that might be tough to hear from a father and a mother figure, but still that you kept on going and succeeded. That's very inspirational and motivational.
You know, someone told me this the other day and I absolutely loved it. Is an investor. And he told me, you know, I always look for people or entrepreneurs that have had someone in their lives tell them that they couldn't do something they wanted to do. And they're like 9 out of 10 times, those are the people that really make it happen. And it's sad, right? Because, you know, it's a moment that really hurts you and marks you as a human being when someone that you love says you can't do something, but then it truly becomes your fuel to get it done. So if you're listening to this podcast and someone is telling you that you can't do it, use it as your fuel and prove them wrong. There's nothing more motivating than that.
I love it. And that transitions, you have said so many advice already, but what would be your best advice for people who want to work in sports and maybe women specifically?
So my best advice, so many of them, but I think that the easiest one to implement would be if you know that you want to work in sports and you have an interest in it, try and find someone that has a job similar to the one that you would want to have. And then offer to intern for them or offer to learn from them. You know, it's I think for any sports exec, it's not been an easy road. It's an industry that is very sexy and a lot of people want to work in. So everyone is usually more than open to giving you advice and mentoring you. I mean, I've had a fair share of mentors myself. And then if that job doesn't exist, which is what happened to me, then just go and create it. I know it sounds much more difficult to do than to say, but if it doesn't exist, that doesn't mean that it's not there out there for you.
That's great. I love that. We have talked for quite some time about you, about football, about the business of women's sports. Is there something that I haven't yet asked you that you would like to mention?
That's a great question. I think, you know, maybe talking a little bit about the future consumption of female fans, because we speak a lot about women's football and we speak a lot about professional players on the pitch. And we speak a lot about how this whole industry is growing a lot with the Women's World Cup. But what does that mean for female fans? And I think that's something that is not discussed enough yet, and is probably the most interesting part to me. As a female fan my whole life, I really am eager to see brands talk to me for the first time. And I'm eager to live in a world, in a society where loving the sport is cool for a woman. And it's something that is totally normal and not what happens to me, that even until today, with all the things I've done in my career and in football, I can sit down in a table with men and my opinion will be worth less than whatever they have to say. And it's only because of the gender. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about this, but to me, that perception shift and that kind of understanding that women need to be invited into the sport and how that is, again, going to generate this gigantic business opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there was two parts there. You said in the end that you were in the room, then it's more from an executive side that, or in a business meeting, that your opinion is not as much worth as a man's. And that's one.
It was actually more on the personal side.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. Then I was great. Thank you for clarifying. So when you say the female fans and you want to be invited and be seen by these brands, are we talking, for example, merch that you make that maybe in more women shapes, for example? That could be one thing. Or how do you see this fan engagement from the brands to be more focused on women?
I think that before we get into the products, there's a very big foundational marketing aspect to it, right? How do we speak to female fans, and how do we convince them that this is something for them, right? I always use this example with cigarettes. Back in the 1930s, cigarettes weren't a product for women. Actually, women that smoked were perceived as a lower class woman. It was something that was super badly seen. And you can translate that example, to football very much, right? A woman that watches football is a masculine woman, is a woman that doesn't care about putting on heels or makeup, is a woman that loves to be only with boys and doesn't have girlfriends. And I think that cigarettes, even though a much unhealthier and negative product, was very successful in changing that perception, and utilizing Hollywood and fashion magazines and like this very powerful female figures and a messaging that was undeniable. The biggest campaign that they did at the beginning was called Torches of Freedom. Mm-hmm. How good is that?
Yeah, it's great.
Basically, every time that you inhaled cigarette smoke, you were inhaling freedom. And back then, freedom for women wasn't a normal thing at all. And I think that this needs to happen in football as well. We gotta show women that going to a stadium or wearing a jersey or being a fan of a team is a very positive, cool, hopefully sexy, mainstream thing to do. And that doesn't put you, in this box. That means that you don't, So I always make a massive effort to wear heels, to wear makeup, to care about how I look, because it's really trying to change those stereotypes. But brands can do that by creating big marketing campaigns that reaches people. And, with the access that we have to social media, it's not hard to find this type of content, but just making it, normalizing it. And I think that there's already a move towards that. I actually had a great meeting yesterday with a very big beer company that cares about making sure they're speaking correctly to women. And we discussed so many different aspects of it that we're just, jerseys don't fit women, for example. They don't look good on women. They look great on men, but they don't look good on women. So can we create like a new piece of merch that like maybe is better fitting? And can I do it in collaboration with Gucci or Louis Vuitton? Or can I use some of the clout that these big luxury brands have to make it a cultural moment? So there's so much to be done there. I could speak about it for hours.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And so first, not to look on the product on the first hand, but first to change the perception and to change what people think about it and feel about it and to normalize it. And that's the first step. And then later on, or maybe at the same time, you're looking at this, for example, the jerseys and equipment to better fit women.
Exactly. Even going to a stadium, if you think about this, like the experience of going to a stadium involves drinking beer and involves, kind of being rowdy and loud. And now it's changing because there's a lot of families going. Like, I can assure you, if a club decides to sell oat milk lattes, they're going to make a lot of women happy. And it's such a small thing, right? But it's like, okay, they're thinking about me. Like, I don't think a guy would ever care about drinking an oat milk latte, but a woman would, So it's very small details in some cases where it's like, hey, we're thinking about you and we're thinking about how to make this a place that you want to come to. So hopefully more and more people will do it.
Yeah, for sure. And we're talking about female fans, but it doesn't mean that they have to go only to female sports, obviously, or women's football. We're talking in general for women as fans. And I mean, just offering oat milk latte doesn't mean that you don't offer beer. I mean, we're talking about how do we include men and women at the stadium.
Exactly. It's exactly that. And, in this same meeting I was telling you, the beer company, I said, I'm a woman that loved men's sports her whole life. Like I've watched obviously men's football and men's tennis and I never felt like it was really for me. And I think that it's not only about utilizing women's football as the obvious kind of solution to that, but really thinking about the other half of the world globally and how to include them in the sport. And always with the motivation of creating a bigger business. Because I think that that's really the key there. It's not like a charity thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like we talked about before.
Exactly.
Very interesting topic, and I think we can talk about it forever. And maybe later down the road, things have changed, and we can have a 2.0 version on this topic. But closing up on this interview, the last question that I ask everyone is: if you could choose the next guest on this podcast, who do you think that I should talk to?
I think you should interview my CEO, Lucas von Kronak. So he's the founder and CEO of OneFootball, and he has disrupted this world in various ways. And I don't think he gets enough credit for it. So he should definitely be your next guest. I have so many colleagues and friends that work in football and so many great women, but I think that I'm in love with OneFootball. I love what we do as a company. Obviously, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. And Lucas is very much responsible for all of that and for having a vision that was very much breaking the mold of what football should be and how it should function as a business. And I mean, he did it again by acquiring Gloria. I mean, that was a move that I don't think a lot of people would have done. Made me into the first female founder to sell a company in football. And it was a very bold move. And he's done many of those in his career. So I'm sure that you'll have an incredible conversation.
I'm sure. I didn't know that you were the first woman to sell a startup in football. That's quite an achievement.
Yes. But that only means that from now on, it's just possible.
Fantastic. Vicky, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. And you said maybe we're going to have a 2.0 and we'll discuss. We will certainly have one because things are going to change and I'm working very hard for that.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.